Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the alien ships appear in space around Earth like deadly flowers blooming in the darkness. 12 different alien races had joined together under something they called the Galactic Council, and their massive ships now formed a perfect circle around the entire solar system. The message was clear even before they sent their first transmission. Surrender or Die. Commander Lisa Park walked up to him holding a datapad with grim news written across her face. She had been his second-in-command for 3 years, and he trusted her judgment more than anyone else in the fleet. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the worry underneath when she spoke. The aliens were calling themselves, and they wanted to talk. Jake knew this conversation would change everything for the human race. Either they would find a way to survive this day, or humanity would become slaves to creatures they barely understood. The hologram flickered to life, showing a tall alien with 4 glowing eyes and skin that looked like polished metal. Behind him stood representatives from 11 other species, all looking down at the humans with the same expression of cold superiority. The translator made their words sound mechanical and emotionless. The alien leader introduced himself as Ambassador Zektar, and his message was simple and brutal. Humanity had broken 17 galactic laws by developing technology too fast, expanding into too many star systems, and building too many warships. They had 36 hours to surrender all their weapons, destroy their space fleet, and submit to Council rule. If they refused, the aliens would destroy every human world. From orbit, Jake looked around his bridge at the men and women who had sworn to defend Earth. Captain Ryan Bell was already running numbers on his tactical computer, trying to figure out if they had any chance at all. Lieutenant Amy Stone monitored the communication channels as similar threats poured in from across human space. Every colony, every space station, every human ship was getting the same ultimatum. The aliens were not just threatening Earth. Intelligence. Reports showed identical fleets at Mars, Europa, Titan, New Geneva, and Kepler Station. This was a coordinated attack across 70 light-years of human territory designed to end human independence in a single day. Lisa spoke quietly, telling him what they both already knew. The alien fleet outnumbered every human ship by 3 to 1, and those were just the ships they could see. Each alien vessel was bigger, more heavily armed, and built with technology that some of these races had been perfecting for thousands of years. Jake ordered his communications officer to connect him to President Hayes and Fleet Command. If the aliens wanted humanity to surrender, they were going to have to work for it. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, but he could see the fear in their movements. Everyone knew the odds, and everyone knew what would happen if they lost. But as Jake stared out at the alien armada surrounding his home world, he found himself smiling. The Council had made a serious mistake in their assessment of humanity. They had studied human technology, human tactics, and human expansion patterns. They knew how many ships humanity had and how fast human science was advancing. What they had never bothered to understand was what made humans fight. The aliens saw numbers and statistics. They saw a young race that had only discovered faster than light travel 50 years ago. They saw primitive weapons and simple tactics. They saw a species that should be grateful for the chance to join their galactic civilization as junior members. What they did not see was that humans had spent their entire history fighting against impossible odds. Every human child grew up hearing stories of small groups defeating massive armies through courage, determination, and clever thinking. The aliens might have better technology and more ships, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to accept. Defeat Jake opened a communication channel to every human ship in the solar system. His voice carried clearly across the quantum links connecting the scattered vessels of Earth's defense fleet. He told them that today they would show the galaxy what humanity was really made of. Today they would prove that freedom was worth any price. The alien ambassador was waiting for an answer. His 4 eyes glowed with confidence as he prepared to receive humanity's surrender. Behind him, the other council members watched with the detached interest of scientists observing an experiment. They had done this before to dozens of other young races. The outcome was always the same. President Hayes appeared on the communication screen from her underground command center. Her military uniform was crisp, and her expression was calm despite the alien fleet hanging over her world like a sword. She looked directly into the camera and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. She thanked the Council for their generous offer to surrender but politely declined. Humanity preferred to remain free. The transmission ended, and silence filled both the human and alien command centers. Jake felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. They were about to fight a war they could not win by any reasonable calculation. Their ships were outnumbered, their weapons were inferior, and their technology was centuries behind their enemies. But Jake had read enough history to know that reasonable. Calculations did not always determine the outcome of battles. The aliens had come expecting an easy victory over a primitive race. Instead, they were about to discover why humans had survived every challenge their harsh world had thrown at them. They were about to learn that some species would rather die fighting than live kneeling. The Council ships began moving into attack formation, and Jake gave the order that would start the most important battle in human history. All ships were to prepare for combat and show these ancient aliens what happened when they threatened Earth. High Counselor Vel Nari walked back and forth across the command deck of the Council flagship Eternal Judgment, feeling very pleased with how everything was going. Her tentacles moved in patterns that showed her satisfaction as she watched the other Council members observed the human response with scientific interest. This would be another easy victory to add to their long list of successful conquests. Commander Toresh reported from his tactical station that the humans were moving their fleet into defensive positions around their home world. His scaled hands danced across the displays, showing approximately 200 human vessels, arranging themselves in what he called primitive formations, using predictable strategies. The mathematical outcome was completely certain in their favor, Ambassador. Krisha made clicking sounds with her mandibles that her species used for laughing. 200 human ships against their combined force of 600 was not even a fair fight. The humans could not possibly win this battle, and everyone in the Council fleet knew it. This would be over in a few hours at most. Counselor Mordak shifted his massive body uneasily as he studied the tactical displays. His people had fought many wars over the centuries, and something about this situation made him nervous. Their intelligence reports suggested that humans would not surrender even when facing overwhelming odds. There was something in human psychology that made them resist authority even when resistance was completely irrational. Velnari focused her primary eye on the human formation taking shape around the third planet. She had studied the reports about human expansion and technological development for years before convincing the Council to take action. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. In less than 2 centuries, humans had claimed 74 star systems. They developed new technologies at a rate that violated every established pattern of galactic civilization. The Council had maintained order for 3,000 years by carefully controlling how fast emerging species could advance. New races were guided into predetermined roles within the galactic hierarchy. They were given just enough technology to be useful, but never enough to threaten the established order. It was a system that had brought peace and stability to the entire galaxy. Humans refused to follow this system. They reverse-engineered, captured alien technology, and then improved it beyond what should have been possible. They formed alliances with troublesome independent species that the Council had been trying to contain for centuries. Worst of all, they showed no respect for the territorial boundaries that kept different races from competing with each other. Velnari ordered her staff to show the recordings from the Centauri incident that had convinced the Council to take action. 3 years ago, the Ravager Collective had attacked the human colony at Alpha Centauri, expecting an easy victory over a primitive outpost. The galaxy expected the humans to retreat and call for Council assistance, like all emerging species did when faced with serious threats. Instead, a single human battle group not only defeated the attack, but chased the Ravagers back to their home system and destroyed their entire fleet. The humans used tactics that no Council strategist had anticipated. They configured their weapons in ways that should not have worked. Most disturbing of all, they fought with a level of aggression that reminded older species of legends from the dark times before the Council brought order to the galaxy. Counselor Ythera resonated with harmonic distress as she remembered those ancient recordings. Her crystalline form vibrated with frequencies that expressed deep worry. The humans fought like the devourers of old before the Council contained them and established the current peaceful order. That was exactly why this action was necessary. Now, before the human problem grew any worse, the plan was simple and had worked dozens of times before. They would give the humans one chance to submit peacefully. When the humans refused and their psychological profiles indicated they definitely would refuse, the Council would demonstrate the consequences of defying galactic law. A quick, overwhelming victory would show other emerging species what happened to races that tried to develop too quickly. Commander Toresh looked up from his displays with an important update. They were receiving a response from the human leadership, and it was coming from their planetary government rather than their military commanders. This suggested the humans understood the political nature of the situation. The hologram showed a human female in military uniform standing in what appeared to be an underground command facility. President Jennifer Hayes looked remarkably calm for someone whose entire species was about to be conquered. Her expression showed no fear, no anger, and no indication that she was prepared to negotiate. Hayes spoke clearly and calmly, thanking the Council for their ultimatum and confirming that humanity had reviewed their terms carefully. She paused for a moment, and Velnari found herself leaning forward, despite her complete certainty about the outcome of this conversation. The human president continued with words that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. She told the Council fleets that humanity respectfully declined their generous offer to surrender. Humans preferred to remain free rather than accept slavery, even if slavery came with better technology and protection from galactic threats. Transmission ended and silence filled the Council command center. Then, slowly, Velnari began to emit the low harmonic sounds that her species used for laughter. Everything was proceeding exactly as their analysts had predicted. The humans were behaving with typical irrationality, choosing to fight a hopeless battle rather than accept the inevitable. She gave the order to begin the operation and show these primitive creatures what happened when children tried to play war games with their elders. The Council had conquered dozens of species over the centuries, and every single one had eventually seen the wisdom of accepting their place in the galactic order. What Velnari did not know was that humans had been preparing for this day since their first contact with alien civilizations 50 years ago. What she could not understand was that humans had built their entire culture around the idea that freedom was worth any sacrifice. What she had failed to consider was that sometimes children grew up to be stronger than their elders. Captain Danny Wright gripped the command chair of the UES Retribution as the first energy beams cut through space like deadly lightning. The Council had opened fire exactly 36 hours after their ultimatum, just as they had promised. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the controlled chaos that came from years of training for this exact moment. The space around Earth erupted into a deadly dance of ships, energy weapons, and missile trails. The human fleet was heavily outnumbered, but they were not fighting the battle the Council expected them to fight. Every human captain had trained for years on tactics designed specifically to defeat larger, more advanced fleets. Lieutenant Commander Kelly Brooks coordinated the weapons response from her tactical console. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision as she reported a direct hit on the nearest Council cruiser. Their shields were holding, but the alien ship was definitely paying attention to the Retribution. Now Danny called for evasive maneuvers using pattern Delta 7 and ordered all batteries to return fire. The human ships were smaller and faster than their alien opponents, which meant they could change direction and attack angles much more quickly. This was going to be crucial in the battle ahead. Ensign Marcus Green reported from the communications station that they were getting similar reports from other battle groups across the solar system. The Council fleets at Mars, Europa, and the outer colonies were engaging human forces, but something was wrong with their battle formations. Wrong for them, but exactly right for humanity. Danny smiled grimly as he watched the tactical display. The Council ships were maintaining their traditional formation patterns with massive dreadnoughts at the center, surrounded by smaller vessels in geometric arrangements that had won them victories for thousands of years. It was a formation designed to fight other Council-style fleets with similar technology and tactics. What the aliens had not prepared for was fighting an enemy that refused to follow the established rules of galactic warfare. Human military doctrine had been developed by studying every alien conflict they could find and identifying weaknesses in Council tactics. Danny gave the order for all human ships to implement Shadow Protocol. Across the fleet, captains who had drilled this maneuver hundreds of times began executing movements that would have been impossible for larger, more rigid command structures. Human ships broke into small, independent groups, abandoning traditional formation, flying in favor of guerrilla tactics. The UES Retribution dove beneath the orbital plane, using Earth's magnetic field to mask its approach vector. Around them, other human ships scattered like schools of fish, forcing the Council vessels to split their fire and break their own formations to pursue individual targets. Lieutenant Susan Cole called out contact information from her sensor station. A Council destroyer was moving to intercept them at bearing 27 Mark V. Danny told Kelly to prepare what they called the surprise package with obvious satisfaction in his voice. The Retribution's torpedo bays opened, but instead of launching conventional warheads, they released something the Council had never encountered before. The torpedoes split apart during flight, and each one deployed a cloud of smart mines that immediately began seeking the largest energy signatures in the area. The Council destroyers' point defense systems had been designed to intercept incoming missiles, but they could not adapt quickly enough to target hundreds of individual threats. The mines swarmed over the ship's shields and detonated in a cascading pattern that overwhelmed the protective barriers and sent the destroyer tumbling out of control. Kelly reported that they had scored their first kill, and that similar results were happening across the fleet. The Council ships were having serious trouble adapting to human tactics because they had never faced an enemy that fought this way before. Danny nodded, but kept his expression focused and serious. He warned his crew not to get overconfident because their enemies had centuries of experience and technology that humans could barely understand. This was only the opening round of what would be a much longer battle, if summoned by his words. The Council flagship opened fire with its main weapon systems. The energy beams that crossed space were more powerful than anything in humanity's arsenal, and they found their target with devastating accuracy. The UES Courage, one of humanity's newest destroyers, simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. Marcus Green reported the confirmed kill on the Courage with no survivors, and Danny felt the familiar weight of command settle heavily on his shoulders. They were hurting the Council fleet, but the aliens were absolutely right about the mathematics. In a straight fight, humanity would lose this war, but Admiral Morrison had not planned for a straight fight. The entire human strategy was based on leading the Council fleets exactly where humanity wanted them to go. Danny gave the order for Phase 2 of their operation, called the Earth Gambit across the solar system. Human vessels began moving toward predetermined positions that had been calculated months in advance. They were not retreating toward their home world for protection. They were drawing the Council fleets into the most elaborate trap in military history. High Counselor Velnari watched the human maneuvers with growing confusion and concern. The enemy ships were falling back toward their planet, but Council intelligence indicated that Earth's planetary defenses were minimal. A few orbital platforms and some surface-based missiles could not threaten their massive fleet commander. Toresh confirmed that human defensive installations were exactly what their intelligence reports had indicated. Nothing they could see posed any serious threat to Council ships. So why were the humans consolidating their forces around a planet they could not possibly defend? Velnari studied the tactical displays, trying to understand what the humans were planning. They might be primitive, but they were definitely not suicidal. Their recent expansion and technological development proved they were capable of long-term strategic thinking. They had to have some kind of plan. She was about to discover exactly what that plan was and why humans had spent 10 years preparing for this exact moment. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from the UES Defiance as the Council fleets moved into position around Earth exactly as humanity had planned. His command staff monitored displays showing every ship in both fleets tracking the carefully planned movements that would determine whether humanity survived or became slaves to alien masters. Commander Lisa Park reported that Council fleets were at optimal position and all human vessels were clear of the engagement zone. Everything was proceeding according to the plan they had spent 10 years developing in secret. Jake nodded to Captain Ryan Bell and gave the order that would change galactic history forever. Deep beneath Earth's surface in facilities that had been built over the past decade, automated systems came online. The Council had been watching humanity's military development very carefully, but they had missed the most important project of all. Humans had not just built weapons for their ships. They had turned their entire home world into the ultimate defensive platform. The first sign that something was wrong came when massive sections of Earth's crust began to open like giant mechanical flowers. What the Council had assumed were natural. Mountain ranges suddenly revealed themselves as concealed weapons installations. Humans had spent 10 years hollowing out mountains, redirecting rivers, and building the most incredible planetary defense system in galactic history. Ambassador Krisha clicked frantically as energy readings spiked across her sensor displays. Her mandibles moved in patterns that showed panic and confusion as she tried to understand what she was seeing. This was impossible according to every piece of intelligence the Council had gathered about Earth's defenses. High Counselor Velnari stared at the tactical display in complete disbelief. Her tentacles writhed in agitation as she demanded explanations from her intelligence staff. Their surveillance systems had shown no installations of this magnitude anywhere on the human homeworld. From hidden positions across 6 continents, humanity's ultimate weapons emerged from their concealment. Massive railgun installations that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Particle beam arrays that drew power directly from the planet's core through geothermal systems. Missile silos that launched swarms of antimatter. Warheads. The true genius of the Earth Gambit was not the weapons themselves, but how humanity had hidden them from Council surveillance. Every installation had been disguised as something completely innocent. Mining operations, hydroelectric dams, research facilities, and even recreational parks. The Council's spy satellites had seen exactly what humans wanted them to see. Jake Morrison gave the order that every human had been waiting 10 years to hear. All batteries were to fire at will and show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened Earth. The space around humanity's home world erupted in destruction that dwarfed anything the galaxy had seen since the ancient wars streams of relativistic. Projectiles tore through Council formation patterns like invisible hammers. Particle beams carved impossible paths through space, vaporizing everything they touched. The human space fleet, now safely positioned beyond the main engagement zone, began their own bombardment from maximum range. The Council fleet found themselves caught in a crossfire between Earth's planetary defenses and the human space forces. Ships that had survived centuries of galactic warfare were reduced to glowing debris in seconds. The precise geometric formations that had been their greatest strength became a terrible liability as human weapons carved through multiple targets. With each shot, Commander Toresh reported with a cracking voice that shields were failing on the Eternal Judgment, and they needed to withdraw immediately. His scaled hands shook as he watched ship after ship disappear from the tactical display. This was not how galactic warfare was supposed to work. Velnari snarled that withdrawal was impossible because they could not be defeated by a species that barely understood quantum mechanics. But the tactical display told a very different story than her pride wanted to accept. In less than 20 minutes, the Council had lost nearly a third of their entire invasion fleet. The humans were not just fighting back. They were winning decisively against an enemy that should have been completely superior in every possible way. Centuries of galactic military doctrine were being shattered by creatures who had learned to fly in space less than 100 years. Ego Captain Danny Wright commanded his battle group from outside the main engagement zone and watched the destruction with professional satisfaction. His communications officer reported that they were receiving surrender requests from 12 Council vessels that had managed to survive the initial bombardment. Danny denied the surrender requests without any hesitation. The Council had come to Earth planning to destroy human civilization and enslave everyone who survived. Now they would learn what happened when someone made that kind of threat against humanity. The battle continued for another hour, but the outcome was no longer in any doubt. Council fleets trapped in Earth's orbital space and subjected to firepower they had not believed possible began to break apart completely. Some ships tried to flee, only to find human vessels waiting at every hyperspace exit point. Others attempted to fight through the planetary defenses and achieved nothing except their own destruction when the last Council ship finally transmitted. Its surrender, Admiral Morrison opened a communication channel to all surviving vessels. His voice carried clearly across space as he delivered humanity's terms to their would-be conquerors. This was Admiral Morrison of the United Earth Space Command, speaking to the remnants of the Council invasion fleet. Their fleets had been defeated. Their invasion had failed completely, and their threat to humanity had been answered with overwhelming force. They had one opportunity to leave human space peacefully. Any attempt to return would result in the complete destruction of their forces. High Counselor Velnari found herself in the impossible position of accepting terms from a species she had come to conquer. Her flagship was severely damaged, half her fleet was destroyed, and the survivors were trapped in a system controlled by an enemy they had completely underestimated. She whispered that this outcome was impossible given their mathematical certainty, technological superiority, and tactical advantages. Commander Torres replied quietly that the humans had never been fighting the battle the Council had prepared for. As the surviving Council ships limped away from Earth, President Jennifer Hayes addressed the human fleet from her command center. Today, humanity had proven that freedom was not something to be surrendered to those who thought themselves superior. Today they had shown the galaxy that Earth would not bow to any master. Today they had earned their place among the stars. 3 months after the Battle of Earth, the shock waves were still spreading across the galaxy like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. In the Council chambers on Arcturus Prime, emergency sessions had been running day and night as member. Species struggled to understand the impossible reality of their defeat. Senator Rebecca Davis of the newly created Human Diplomatic Corps stood before the reconvened Galactic Council. Her presence was a stark reminder of how quickly the balance of power had shifted in the galaxy. Behind her sat Admiral Morrison and President Hayes, representing a species that had just rewritten the rules of galactic civilization. Ambassador Zektar spoke with obvious difficulty about the human demands for recognition as a sovereign species. His 4 eyes could not meet the steady gaze of the human delegation, as he explained that humanity refused to submit to Council authority and claimed the right to govern their own territory without interference. High Counselor Velnari struggled to maintain her composure as she discussed the precedent this situation was setting. Her position had been severely weakened by the military disaster, and many Council members were questioning her leadership. If one emerging species could successfully resist Council authority, then others would certainly follow their example. The stability they had maintained for 3,000 years was in serious danger. Senator Davis rose from her seat and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone representing a species that had just changed galactic history forever. She explained that humanity had never sought to disrupt the established galactic order. They simply refused to surrender their freedom to it, no matter what the consequences might be. Ambassador Krisha clicked her mandibles in distress as she explained that human freedom threatened their entire civilization. Human rapid technological development, aggressive expansion, and alliance building with independent systems were destabilizing everything the Council had spent millennia creating. President Hayes spoke for the first time since the session began, and her words sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. She suggested that perhaps their civilization had needed to be destabilized for quite some time. The chamber erupted in harmonic protests, clicking mandibles and resonating crystals as the various species reacted to what amounted to heresy in council space. But Hayes continued speaking, and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. For 3,000 years, the council had maintained order by suppressing innovation, preventing expansion, and forcing emerging species into predetermined roles in their hierarchy. They called this system stability, but humans called it stagnation and oppression. Admiral Morrison activated a holographic display showing galactic development statistics that painted a disturbing picture. In the past 1,000 years, member species of the Council had developed exactly 17 new technologies that could be considered truly revolutionary. Humanity had developed 43 major innovations in just the past 50 years. Counselor Mordok protested that this represented dangerous, uncontrolled development. Human technology advancement was happening without proper wisdom, and their expansion was occurring without consideration for existing territorial agreements. Morrison replied calmly that this dangerous technology had allowed a fleet of 200 human ships to defeat 600 council vessels. Perhaps the real question was not whether human development was too fast, but whether council stagnation had made them weak and vulnerable. The implications of his words were not lost on the assembled delegates. For the first time in galactic history, a supposedly primitive species had not only resisted council authority, but had demonstrated that the council's technological and military superiority was no longer absolute. Senator Davis stepped forward and presented humanity's proposal for a completely new kind of relationship. Not subjugation and not domination, but genuine cooperation between equals. Humanity would share their innovations with species willing to engage in mutual research and development. They would establish trade agreements based on equality rather than hierarchy. Most importantly, they would defend any species that chose independence over submission. The last statement sent shockwaves through the chamber because the human was essentially offering to lead a rebellion against the established order. They were providing military protection for any species that chose to leave the Council's sphere of influence. Velnari asked carefully how many species had contacted humanity since their victory, and how many had expressed interest in this new alliance. The answer she received confirmed her worst fears about the situation. Davis smiled as she reported that 47 species had sent diplomatic representatives to Earth in the past month. 18 had formally requested defense agreements with humanity. 3 had already announced their intention to withdraw from Council authority entirely. The chamber fell completely silent as the delegates absorbed this information. The galaxy's oldest civilization was facing the first existential threat to its authority in 3,000 years. And that threat came from a species that had discovered faster than light travel less than a century ago. Velnari asked the most important question of all. What exactly did humanity want from this negotiation? Hayes replied with a list of demands that would fundamentally reshape galactic politics. Recognition of human sovereignty over their existing territory, the right to continued expansion into unclaimed star systems, the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between humanity and any council species that desired them. Most importantly, the guarantee that no future attempt would be made to force humanity into council authority. When Velnari asked what humanity would offer in return, Admiral Morrison leaned forward with an expression that was both serious and hopeful. Humanity would not actively recruit council species to their alliance. They would respect existing council territory and treaty agreements. Most importantly, they would defend the galaxy against external threats that endangered all their civilizations. Counselor Ythara resonated with curiosity as she asked about these external threats. Morrison's expression grew dark as he explained that the galaxy was much larger than Council space, and there were powers beyond their borders that made their recent conflict look like a minor disagreement, the Void Stalkers in the Galactic Rim. The machine intelligences of the Dark Nebula and the entity ancient records called the Devourer were all real threats that could return at any time. If any of these dangers came back, all the civilized species would need to stand together or face extinction. Velnari asked skeptically whether humanity would really ally with the Council against such threats after the Council had attempted to conquer their species. President Hayes stood and spoke with the weight of human history behind her words. Humanity would ally with anyone willing to stand against the darkness, because that was what humans did. They fought for what was right, even when the odds were against them, and even when their former enemies became their allies in the face of greater threats. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, Captain Lisa Park stood on the observation deck of the UES Endeavour, watching the construction of humanity's first deep space defense station. Around her, the Aurora shipyards hummed with constant activity as human engineers worked alongside alien specialists from 17 different species who had joined the growing Terran Alliance. The alliance had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible when the war began. What had started as humanity's fight for independence had evolved into a galactic revolution that was reshaping the political landscape of known space. Species that had been under Council control for centuries were discovering what freedom could. Mean Lieutenant Commander Alex Cameron called from the communications station with an important update. Admiral Morrison was sending a priority transmission about the Council delegation that had finally arrived at New Geneva Station. The peace negotiations had been ongoing for months, but this meeting was different because High Counselor Velnari was coming to human space for the first time. The main display showed the conference room where President Hayes sat across from an expanded Council delegation. Admiral Morrison and Secretary of Galactic Affairs Rebecca Davis flanked her on either side. The tension in the room was obvious even through the video link. Velnari reported that the situation had stabilized in most sectors, but they continued to receive disturbing reports about species leaving Council authority to join the Human Alliance. Her tone was considerably more respectful than it had been a year ago, but the underlying concern was clear. Secretary Davis confirmed that 23 species had voluntarily left Council space in the past 6 months. All were seeking the technological cooperation and military protection that the Terran Alliance offered to its members. None had been coerced or threatened by human representatives. Ambassador Creshaw pointed out that this technological cooperation included weapons capable of destroying Council ships. Human rapid advancement continued to outpace their ability to maintain defensive equality. With the growing alliance, Admiral Morrison activated a holographic display showing the latest innovations from humanity's research programs. He explained that they had been sharing defensive technologies with Council species for 8 months. Council ships now carried human-designed shield generators, improved targeting systems, and enhanced propulsion units. Humanity was not trying to maintain military superiority, but rather to raise everyone's defensive capabilities. Velnari demanded to know the purpose behind this rapid militarization of dozens of species. The human actions seemed contrary to their stated peaceful intentions, and the Council was growing concerned about the Alliance's ultimate goals. President Hayes leaned forward with a serious expression and ordered Admiral Morrison to show them the reconnaissance data that would explain everything. The display shifted to show long-range sensor readings from the galactic rim that sent chills through every delegate in the room. Massive structures were moving through dark space beyond the galaxy's edge. The readings matched no known galactic civilization, but they did match something from the most ancient and terrifying legends. Based on movement patterns and energy signatures, they were approximately 18 months away from the nearest inhabited systems. Morrison explained that the Void Stalkers were stirring after 3,000 years of dormancy. Deep-range scouts had detected energy signatures consistent with their ancient war machines. The information had been confirmed by 3 independent sensor arrays and corroborated by intelligence from the machine worlds in the dark nebula. The artificial intelligences that lived in the space between stars had been monitoring the void for centuries. They had detected massive mobilization among the stalker fleets and estimated that the next invasion would be far larger than the one that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization 3 millennia ago. Counselor Mordak shifted uneasily as he absorbed the implications of this news. If the Void Stalkers returned with their full strength, even the combined forces of every galactic civilization might not be sufficient to stop them. The ancient enemy had had 3,000 years to grow stronger, while the galaxy had grown complacent. Hayes explained that this was exactly why humanity had been developing new weapon systems and strengthening their alliance structure. They were not building an empire for conquest. They were building an army for survival against an enemy that wanted to devour every living thing in the galaxy. Captain Park watched the negotiations from the Endeavor while dividing her attention between the political discussions and tactical displays showing fleet movements across human space. The Terran Alliance now commanded over 400 warships, with new vessels being commissioned every week. More importantly, those ships carried technologies that had not existed a year ago. Lieutenant Cameron reported confirmation from the test facility at Jupiter that the new quantum torpedoes were performing within acceptable parameters. The quantum weapons represented humanity's most advanced military technology and were specifically designed to fight enemies like the Void Stalkers. President Hayes presented humanity's proposal for galactic defense to the assembled council delegates. The Terran Alliance proposed the formation of the Galactic Defense Coalition, where every participating species would contribute ships, technology, and personnel to a unified command structure. In return, all participants would share in the advanced technologies necessary to fight the external threats. Velnari observed that this would essentially be a unified command under human leadership. Hayes corrected her by pointing out that it would be command under competent leadership. Admiral Morrison had proven his tactical abilities against superior forces, and humanity had proven their willingness to fight for galactic freedom. The negotiations continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable once the council delegates fully understood the threat they were facing. Faced with the return of the galaxy's oldest and most dangerous enemy, even the proudest council species recognized the necessity of cooperation. 3 days later, the Galactic Defense Coalition was officially established, with 87 species signing the founding charter. It created the largest military alliance in galactic history, with Admiral Morrison at its head and a joint command staff that included officers from dozens of different worlds. Captain Park received orders to report to the new coalition headquarters at Centauri Station, where she would command one of the integrated battle groups preparing for the coming invasion. As the Endeavor departed Aurora shipyards, she looked back at the construction activity with deep satisfaction. Humanity had started this conflict fighting for their freedom from alien domination. Now they were fighting for everyone's freedom against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. When the Void Stalkers finally arrived, they would find a united galaxy armed with weapons beyond their darkest nightmares and led by a species that had turned defiance into an art form. The Galactic Council had demanded humanity's surrender and expected easy victory over a primitive species. Instead, humanity had given them hope for survival against an enemy that made their recent conflict look like a minor disagreement between friends. Admiral Morrison's final log entry from the Battle of Earth had proven to be prophetic. Today, humanity had shown the galaxy that some things were worth fighting for, and tomorrow they would show them what they were willing to fight against when freedom itself was threatened. The age of human expansion was over, and the age of human leadership had begun. In the depths of space, ancient enemies were stirring, but they would find a galaxy very different from the one they had terrorized before.